time to start the conversation. It's time for an unauthorized caucus.
Well, welcome in, folks. Another unauthorized caucus. It's another Monday, so we've got a great episode lined up this week. And it's a beautiful thing because you don't just have to listen to me and Mason pick things apart. No. We have a very special guest with us today. We've done this a few times. I promised you we were going to do a bit more of it here in 2025. There's just too much to lean into. And, you know, as you all know, folks, we start conversations here, but we aren't always giving you every bit of the answers. We're just really getting you deeper into a topic that maybe you've seen the headlines on, but here's your gateway into going farther. So that's what we'll do today. Let me remind you before we get started, go to unauthorizedcaucus.com. You can, of course, subscribe to us across all the platforms. We're on Rumble primarily. Find us on YouTube as long as they allow us. But then go to unauthorizedcaucus.com. That's where you're going to find the sign up for our email notifications. You'll get all of the links and resources. I promise you, this is an episode you're going to want to have all of those links. We're going to cover a few things. I'll be ready to write some notes as we go. But we're just going to dive right into it today. We're joined by Mr. Kevin Shipp. He is the author of a almost brand new book. This is just last October, Twilight of the Shadow Government. And I'm real excited. I got a copy of it here in front of me. This is a fantastic book that you need to get a hold of. How Transparency Will Kill the Deep State. Kevin Shipp and Kent Heckenlively. I know that name probably is a little familiar to you, a couple of them, Skyhorse Publishing. But Kevin was in the CIA, high security positions over 2 decades, including the protective detail for the CIA director. His counterterrorism expertise took him to operations worldwide, including managing the protective detail for President Karzai over in the Middle East. But there's a lot of things that have happened over that career. And what he turned to was exposing internal corruption. And as a result, he's faced an incredible amount of agency retaliation, sacrificed his pension, threats against him and his family. But in spite of all of that, instead of shriveling back and saying, no, you win, he said, no, I'm going to dedicate myself to government transparency, to intelligence community reform. And boy, are we on the precipice of that, or at least it feels like it right now. So it's a very timely topic. Mr. Shipp, we're so glad you're here with us. Thank you for being on with us today.
Hey, thanks for having me. Great to be on.
Yeah, we're so excited. We've got a copy of the book here. And again, I highly encourage everyone to get it. Skyhorse Publishing. You can go find a copy. The link will be in the notes, folks. This is one you want to. But you were just telling us the success has been of this book has been so good that they're having to restock it. So what did, I mean, if you would just give us a little bit of a background on yourself. I mean, I said a few top lines, but I'd love to hear how you got into agency work and then some of the highlights that led you to why this book was so important for you to write.
Absolutely. Yes. Excuse me. Let me just got to get my phone here. Sorry. I had no intention of working for the CIA. I was basically a starving biologist working in biology labs. That was my undergraduate degree. And I had a good buddy to make a story, just to summarize, who just came up to me and we knew each other very well for a few years. And he said, listen, why don't you apply for a job at the CIA? I didn't know at the time that he was working for the CIA. And he couldn't say that, but he said, why don't you put in an application? You know, they may take you on. I said, Dana, who's a dear friend, I said, they are never going to hire me if they go in and do a background investigation on my college days and talk to some of my college friends. I doubt it. And he goes, so he pressured me about 2 or 3 times. And I finally filled out the SF-171 and all the paperwork, submitted the application, and just washed my hands like, okay, that's it. They're never going to bring me in. Then I get a call. Oh, goodness. About 3 months later, a phone rings. Hello, Mr. X. Or excuse me, Kevin Shipp. This is Mr. X. You put in an application with the Central Intelligence Agency? And I said, yeah. And they said, we've got your application and we'd like to proceed. Would you like to continue with your application? I said, sure. So that was the end of that call. Oh, golly, about another 3 months went by and I started getting calls from friends saying, hey, we got 2 guys from the FBI in suits knocking on our door, asking questions about you. What have you done? And I said, nothing. Well, not since college anyway. And so that started happening. Then I get another phone call. I pick up the phone. Kevin Shipp. Yes, it was a lady. Yes, ma'am. She goes, this is Mrs. X. We have forwarded processing of your application. I just wanted to check and see if you're still interested in working for the Central Intelligence Agency. I said, yeah, sure. She said, okay, we'll continue with your application. That was the end of that conversation. Another month later, I get another phone call. I mean, they just leave you hanging out there. You have no idea what they're doing or what they're checking or where they are. So it's an odd feeling. About a month later, I get a phone call. Kevin Shipp, Mr. X, again, we have your application. It's moving through. We'd like you to come in for a personal interview at CIA headquarters. Are you willing to do that? I said, sure. So set up time and date. I showed up at CIA headquarters in Langley. They processed me in through the main lobby there where the turnstiles are, back in this little office with this long room with doors with combination locks. Lady said, have a seat. He'll be with you shortly. So I sat there, and she comes back and goes, he will see you now. So I get up and I walk down this long corridor, and down at the end is this open door, and I walk in there, and here's this gray-haired fella sitting behind this big desk, chain smoking. That's back when you could smoke in government buildings. And he said, Kevin, come on in and have a seat. So I came in and sat down in the chair in front of this desk. And it's the old deflating chair trick where and the chair deflates and all of a sudden they're like above you. And I remember thinking, I'm going to sit on the arm of the chair. I'm not going to let him try to pull this. Anyway, I sat in the chair and sat down. And he goes, takes a drag out of his cigarette, and he goes, Kevin, I ask you one question. I said, yes, sir. He goes, have you ever broken the law? And I remember thinking, well, that's the end of the whole application process and this interview. And I had become I had a radical conversion, become a pretty dedicated Christian. So I had to tell the truth. So I said, when he asked if I'd broken the law, I said, yes, sir, I have. And he goes, takes another drag off his cigarette, and he goes, why don't you tell me all about it? So I went through this long litany of all the things I did in college, booze and dope and climbing to the top of radio towers on dares. And when I was done, I said, well, hey, I told the truth. And the funny thing is he listens intently, doesn't say a word. Then when I'm done, he leans back, takes a drag off his cigarette, looks at this steam, blows it out his nose, and goes, I got no problem with that. You want to continue with your application? I'm like, sure. He goes, okay, that will be all. So I was dismissed, left CIA headquarters, went back home like, yeah, wait, man. Then I get another call. This whole process can take 6 months to a year. They've sped it up quite a bit in the last few years because they were losing people. But back then, it was 6 months to a year. So a month later, I get another phone call. Kevin Shipp, you have been moved forward in your process with the Central Intelligence Agency. We'd like to schedule you for a polygraph exam. Are you willing to do that? I said, sure. So they set up the time and date. I reported this to this obscure building somewhere in Northern Virginia. Went in there. It was a polygraph division, obviously. Went in there and sat down for my polygraph. They took me back into the little interrogation room with the two-way mirror and everything, and hooked me up to the polygraph instrument with the finger plates and the pneumatic tubes and everything. And the examiner goes, okay, Kev, before we start this polygraph, is there anything that you'd like to get off your chest or share that you'd like to talk about before we get the instrument going? I said, oh, yeah. He goes, like what? I said, well, he asked me last time if I'd broken the law. And I said, yeah. And I just went through the whole litany again, thinking, God, I was amazed I made it that far. And thought, okay, well, whatever. So I went through the polygraph examination, and he was done in 2 hours, which I found out years later. I became a polygraph examiner. 2 hours that's a good sign. If you got through it that quickly, you're clean because I told the truth, good, bad, and ugly. Then I got the phone call, another month. Kevin, this is Mr. X again. Just want to inform you that your application has been accepted with the Central Intelligence Agency. You have been hired. Report to such and such a building in Crystal City, and they will take it from there. I showed up there, another discreet building, walked in through a combination locked door, and they sat me in there where I waited for 7 weeks for their process to be finished until they walked in and they said, you're hired. Report to headquarters on such and such a date. Anyway, so that's how that went. It was an interesting process, kind of grueling early.
And remind me, when was this that you entered, CIA service?
Let's see. That was I started with the CIA in 1985 is when that happened.
1985. Mm-hmm. Okay. And in your total length of service, remind me when you got out.
Yeah, I got out in March of 2002 at 17 years, and then went to work for the Department of State Anti-Terrorism Assistance Program for another 3 years. So 17 years with the CIA.
Wow. That's fantastic. And I mean, this is, a often this is stuff that we only get a chance to see through the lens of Hollywood or some other nonsense entity. I mean, we don't often get to, hear. There's a lot of folks who try to build up, and typically you find someone like that who writes a book or does something. They're trying to make themselves into some sort of figure that looks like a Jack Ryan or whatever it is,
Right.
instead of, no, I'm here to tell the truth. So it is not very often I feel like we get a chance to do stuff like this, and then let alone to have someone who's not only a believer but also a believer in the Constitution say, okay,
Yeah.
now let's talk. Now let's talk about where it was.
Yeah.
Well, if you would, you had another book. Do you have one other book before this, or were there two?
Yes. After I did a secret investigation the CIA was not aware of with Department of State IG, and that's a whole nother story. But I knew that I was targeted after the CIA was publicly rebuked. They didn't even know the investigation was going on. They told me not to tell my supervisors or anyone at the CIA. So I was a labeled man when that happened, and that's another story. So my career went on from there, and what the crowning point was, I was placed on a secret base in the United States where the CIA had buried a lot of its skeletons. And they put me and my family in a house that they knew was badly contaminated, and the entire family got sick, almost terminal. My son, they said basically that he could very possibly be terminal. His immune system was so bad. Anyway, so our house was broken into. They painted a chemical on the ceiling. I'd found mycotoxins on the ceiling. I'd found it. They had the house bugged because they knew right where it was. And they went in and painted a chemical over the mycotoxins I'd found. Chemical was invisible, but they didn't know I had a ultraviolet light, a black light, which lit up their chemical too. And that's where it all started. And I saw the CIA do things I never imagined they would do. Not only I was a Category 1 officer and a top performer, not only to a loyal officer, but to a wife and children. It was like 3 days. My attorney said later on, he goes, when he saw the chemical on the ceiling, he goes, man, this is like 3 days of the Condor. I'm like, yeah, this is insane. So filed a personal injury lawsuit, and that's a whole nother story. And we went after him, and that's where the fun really started. They were driven to a settlement with our family, signed a settlement agreement. We all thought it was over. We'd lost all our possessions. Everything in the house had to be taken out and burned because of all the toxins that they were exposed to. We literally lost everything. So we thought the settlement, which was only half what it should have been, would close it out. So the CIA Office of General Counsel, and I've done videos on this because I think they need to be held accountable for this, contacted my attorney about a week later and said, the CIA is not going to abide by it was a court-ordered mediated settlement by a judge. So we're not going to abide by that settlement agreement. If Mr. Shipp doesn't accept a lower settlement, we're going to invoke the state secrets privilege and seal his case. That's when I started to see the unbridled power that the CIA has. That's why you don't ever see any CIA whistleblowers. They will shut you down, seal your case with the threat of prison, and then drive you completely into destruction financially. And I've done videos on exactly how they do it step by step. So that's what happened. And finally, I wrote In From the Cold, to answer your question, Twilight of the Shadow Government. And in that book, I talked about the poisonings, the break-ins, and all of that. And I knew, what I was up against. I went back and forth with the CIA for about 6 months. And they wound up redacting or blacking out everything about my family's poisoning, the break-ins, the destruction of documents, my targeting from the CIA IG. All of that was redacted in From the Cold. And I knew they were going to do that. So what I did, when you answer to a higher authority, you're not really afraid of man's institutions, and that's kind of the way it went here. So I built a code in from the Company of Shadows, the book, and you follow the code. And it's funny, the epilogue in the last chapter of In From the Cold, I kind of opine about, it says that my family was devastated by the CIA's use of and they blacked out what they used to silence us. So in the bullet points From the Company of Shadows, I go through kind of opine about life and stuff. And if you take the first letter of each bullet and line it up, it says state secrets privilege. And the CIA censors missed it. And In From the Cold was published with that code in it. I was just, how simple a code can you get, Anyway, so that I knew I may pay a price for that, but it was what I had seen. The power that they have over American citizens is unconstitutional. They're a rogue agency. They're a criminal agency. And after that, I wrote Twilight of the Shadow Government because the American people need to know how illegal and criminal this organization is and can be. And I have steps for CIA reform. I'm a friend of Bobby Kennedy Jr. We've talked at length about that, and it's time for the CIA to be broken apart and reformed. And that it was not something I was looking to do, but so many people have said, no, you're called to do this, do it. So I took the risk, and here I am.
Well, it's very serendipitous because only a little bit ago, I sent Ryan a text of this news article that said the Doge initiatives are coming to the CIA and planning on doing some big layoffs there, some of the breaking apart. But before we get into that, I want to get into before it hopefully starts getting fixed, we should get into what was wrong in the first place. And you mentioned that this is a criminal organization with extreme power over American citizens, and like the CIA is supposed to operate on foreign stuff, as far as I understand. So they shouldn't even be doing anything with American citizens here. But I was wondering if you could kind of contrast the popular understanding of what the CIA is and what the CIA does versus the reality that you have seen.
Sure, certainly. Well, I'm a big fan of spy movies, James Bond and things like that, because they're fun movies, but that's not at all what the CIA is like. And I was out in the field collecting human intelligence. It is dirty, immoral. When you're out in the field, and I went native, meaning I backslid for about 5 years. I got an award for collecting intelligence, but you lie, you cheat, you drink to get information, you steal even from our allied government friends. Officers I worked with, including senior officers, would go out with prostitutes at night, on our tax dollars. It ain't no James Bond, let me tell you. Now, that being said, I worked with 2 case officers and 1 chief of station that were absolutely magnificent. So they're not all like that, just maybe most of them. There is no James Bond. If you're going to be a case officer, they make sure you check your morals if you have any at the door. And that's why there's so many narcissists in the CIA. So the CIA that I saw was this brutal juggernaut of secrecy. It controls Congress. It controls the judiciary. It even controls the White House. Congress has no access to the CIA's secret budget. Even the Gang of 8 doesn't know the full. That's 8 clear congressmen and senators. They don't even know the full scope of the CIA budget. But congressmen, when they do demand documents like the torture report, for example, and I have a copy of that on some of my programs, CIA refused to provide the torture report, and Congress demanded it over and over. So what they got, you can Google this, it's kind of funny to see. What they got is a document that was entirely blacked out or redacted. And the CIA has done that routinely to Congress as a matter of procedure. If you look at the Epstein files that were just released by FBI intelligence, which is hand in hand with the CIA intelligence, even the Epstein records, which were released publicly, are redacted, blacked out. A lot of the information in the binders that they turned over, they have the power to do that, to black out anything they don't want congressmen to know, period. And that power was given to them in the National Security Act of 1947, which had very broad wording, which basically said the CIA will engage in activities for the National Security Council from time to time as the NSC requires. That was it. It did not give them the bizarre authority that they have had since 1947. Then in 1948, they drafted the National Security Council Directive 10-2. That said that the CIA could engage in any covert operation, propaganda, assassination, economic warfare, on and on and on. It gives basically the CIA blanket authority to do whatever it wants. That was in 1948. Since then, the CIA has staged about 4 coups. It resulted in a coup in Indonesia of President Sukarno. 500,000 Indonesians died. Iraq, which is based on false CIA intelligence, 500,000 Iraqi citizens died because of the CIA's false intelligence. And I've got a whole list of these things the CIA has done to the tune of the death of about 7 million innocent people. I think it's time for that organization to go, past time. And they control the judiciary. By any case that they want that has evidence against them, they will seal it with a state secrets privilege, which they tried to do to me. I wasn't going to have it because I think the Constitution is above the state secrets privilege. But they do that. They'll seal any case. That's the reason there's no CIA whistleblowers. They seal their evidence, threaten them with prison. They even threatened my family with prison because they were poisoned. If they talked about it, they were violating the state secrets privilege and they could go to jail, including my 10-year-old daughter, if you could imagine that. So I saw the ugliness personally from the inside. I have it all documented. I even have tape recordings, knowing that, okay, that's it. I'm going to expose this organization for what it is. And through kind of a divine providential set of events, I met Kent Heckenlively, my courageous co-author. And I want to give a shout out to Kent because it really took some guts for him to join me on this project and write this book. And he's just a magnificent author. I would recommend you get any of Heckenlively's books because not only is he a tremendous writer, but he's a good patriot and a good man. So it all happened over a phone call. I decided not to write any books. I decided to just move on with my life on the Off-the-Grid farm and be happy. And I'll make this very short. I was sitting in Lowe's parking lot. Lowe's is like my toy store. It's where I go when, I'm having kind of a bad day and I want to kind of chill. I go to Lowe's and just walk around and try to invent stuff. But anyway, so I'm sitting in the parking lot of Lowe's. I get this phone call. Yeah. Kevin Shipp said, yeah, this is Kent Heckenlively. Tony from Skyhorse asked me to call you because Tony Lyons of Skyhorse was pressuring me to write the book. Bobby Kennedy Jr., who endorsed it, was pressuring me to write the book. I knew what the risk was, so I was hesitant. Anyway, on this phone call, Kent goes, listen, I know you're looking for a ghostwriter to help you write this book because I had to get it out fast. And I said, I'd be interested in talking about that. I said, well, listen, Kent, I don't think it's honest. Authors that use ghostwriters to write the whole thing and then they stick their name on it as if they wrote it. I don't think that's honest. So if you join me in this, you will be a co-author, not a ghostwriter. And he said, listen, if you do that, and if you put my name on the cover, which he deserves, that I'll do this pro bono for you. And that just doesn't happen, period. And right there, we both just knew this is it. I said, we agreed right on the phone. We started working on it 3 days later, every day for about 4 hours. For 4 months, we wrote that book. And Kent, there are things I couldn't say. And so I'd give Kent kind of the general idea. And he'd bulldog it and go out there and dig all this open source information, pieces of the puzzle, which showed what was really going on. He's just a master at that. So there's stuff in his book that you're not going to find anywhere else. And a lot of that goes to Kent. I divulged everything I could, kind of right at the edge of the envelope so they wouldn't come and arrest me. I really did think I was going to get arrested after my first presentation and then after that book, which is fine, put me in jail. I'm still saved. Anyway. But so Kent was magnificent. That all came together so fast. That book was out in 4 months. I sent it to the CIA as required by my secrecy agreement. They sat on it for 3 months. I knew they were going to sit on it for longer. They'll do it up to a year, 2 years. I've met people, they did it for 5 years. And if they did approve it, it was going to be redacted. I knew that. I'd seen that. I'd proved that with In From the Cold. So after the CIA had it for 3 months, I published it. I told Tony at the Skyhorse and Kent, publish it. And so we did. And I got my first threat from the CIA about a week later. We consider this a violation of your non-disclosure agreement. And I'm like, duh. I'm fully aware of that. This is an intentional act. So put that in your pipe and smoke it. I don't care what you do. I haven't heard from them since. Usually the first thing they try to do is take all your royalties from your book. And they've done that historically. If they do that to me, fine. That's not why I wrote it. I wrote it so the American people can see what this monster is. And that's generally kind of how things went.
It's an absolutely fascinating story. And I mean, it's, to see the growth and entanglement of what has happened inside this agency is just pretty shocking. But the incredible part of it is now, I think, is so exciting how it's coming to light and it's becoming more mainstream.
Yes.
And, each piece that gets rolled back, I really got to say, in my mind, and you tell me if you think this is right. I think that one of the key pieces of this is that for so very long, we've had a corporate news apparatus that has just continued to roll along. And really until 2015, really until Donald Trump, it kind of rolled under the cover of, well, yes, there's left-wing bias in mainstream media. I mean, I grew up listening to Rush Limbaugh on the radio, mainstream media bias. But in 2015, really 2016, when Donald Trump won, like the curtain got pulled back and the full-throated fake news propaganda just came out. They lost their minds and couldn't deal with it anymore. Mm-hmm. And since then, not only two things have happened. I feel like they've gotten very careless because it's just gone straight propaganda and they're not as careful twisting stories or hiding things. And then number two, people don't believe them like they used to. They don't just take it at face value. So, to the point, it would have been kind of, your chapter 1 in the book, The Lies of Bob Woodward. You're like, oh yeah, well, I believe this, but there are a lot of other people out there. Oh, Bob Woodward, Bernstein, all the president's men. Well, now we have, just this week, it was Bill Murray going on and they're just shooting the breeze on the Joe Rogan podcast. Yeah. And all of a sudden here it comes up about, how, oh, Bob Woodward is such a liar. And I'm trying to remember exactly what he said. I forgot to keep the quote pulled up in front of me, but he's such a liar.
I'm sorry. He said something that wasn't true about John Belushi at all. They fabricated it, which is what he does. But yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, this is the legend of Bob Woodward is being torn down. So we live in the era, I feel like, finally, the Trump era. And if nothing else we ever get from it, the destruction of the corporate news media as an entity that was generally trusted in America, that to me is the biggest thing, because they've given cover to a lot of this stuff. And you kind of go into it in the book. This is just wild. Well, let me ask you this, because I've got about 4 different directions I want to go off on too. But something you just said, you made a comment about coups, the CIA and coups across the world. Do you have any insight or any commentary for us? Because this is a common topic of conversation now that we have Zelensky in and out of the White House, in and out of the discussions. We're all reminded of the CIA's involvement, or at least alleged involvement. Some of us connect it to the 2014 Euromaidan revolution.
That's right.
Do you have any insight on that for us? Because, there's this is a very difficult conversation to have with people out in the middle, because if you say anything to the effect of, well, I have some questions about Zelensky and his leadership. Oh, you're just a Putin apologist. No, pause. I don't like him either, but I have serious questions about who we're giving billions of dollars to. Can we have that discussion? And I feel like there's so much hyperbole and so little fact. What insight could you give us from your time? And
I think you're exactly right. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. What a lot of people do not know, and Congress knows, many congressmen know this, but they're not talking about it, is in 2014, the CIA, the director, John Brennan, made secret trips over to Ukraine to begin planning the coup, along with Victoria Nuland, who's like the devil in the State Department, to overthrow the elected Ukrainian government and install Vladimir Zelensky as their new president. He is a CIA installation. And the CIA and Victoria Nuland, Department of State, started that coup. As with all CIA coups, what do we have now? 1.8 million young Ukrainian men are dead, and about the same amount on the Russian side. I'm no fan of Putin. He can be very bloodthirsty either. But the CIA went in there, violated the Minsk agreement, pushing for Ukraine to be a part of NATO, the very thing we agreed we wouldn't do with Russia. Put the CIA right on Russia's border, staging a coup, and provoked Putin to do what he had a proclivity to do, and that was move in and stop it. So this all started again with a CIA coup, and now there's millions of young men that are dead, and they still don't. That's why I was so thrilled with what President Trump said in his remarks the other evening. We're done sending money to Ukraine while they just spill the blood of millions of young men and could care less. And while these congressmen and senators in Washington swirl their scotch in their glasses, young men are being killed and maimed on the front line, and they don't feel any of the effect. It's grotesque, and I can't tell you how thrilled I could be that President Trump is stopping that, and I'm sure he knows that was a CIA coup. You guys probably realized or picked up that he didn't, during his address, didn't say a thing about the new CIA director or the CIA. That was very smart. Because they're doing a lot of things behind the scenes about the CIA. But it was the CIA that is responsible now for the death of millions of young men, just like in the Bay of Pigs, when JFK and Khrushchev were working together to stop the conflict and peace, because they were looking at nuclear annihilation. They were working together to stop the conflict and come to an agreement with the United States and Cuba through Russia. The CIA sent armed mafia members over to Cuba to shoot Russian vessels, sink Russian vessels, and kept prompting Cuba for war, because the CIA wanted Cuba and put the entire world at risk of nuclear annihilation. Well, here we are back again with the Ukrainian coup of 2014 on the verge potentially of nuclear war. Again, the CIA learns nothing. because all it cares about is itself, the promotion of its global power, its power of secrecy, and it's like a train that can't be stopped. History has repeated itself with the CIA and these bloody coups that backfired, including Al Qaeda. The other terrorist organizations the CIA has funded and created over and over and over. A lot of people don't know that. You don't hear congressmen and senators talk about it. That's why I'm doing it. It's time to dismantle this organization. Keep the good parts, like the Directorate of Intelligence, who trained me in analysis, Directorate of Science and Technology. Good directorates like that need to stay because they do a great job. And that part of the CIA needs to remain. About 80% of employees in the CIA are good, patriotic Americans. It's just, as Mike Pompeo said when he came out, it's just the 20% in management, and that's where I was on the 7th floor, do not believe in the Constitution, and they do not believe in democracy. They believe in CIA expansion. That is absolutely true, right out of the mouth of a former CIA director. This organization has got to be stopped.
Now, you just mentioned, and Mason, I don't want to steamroll if you've got something you want to hop in on, but you just mentioned, a directorate or two. There are 4 directorates of the CIA, correct? And you've worked in all 4 of them. You
Yes.
want to break those out for people? I don't know if everyone understands kind of the structure here.
Yeah, certainly. I was an operations officer with the Director of Operations, now the National Clandestine Service, NCS. I was in the Counterterrorism Center as an operations officer conducting human collection in the Middle East and against terrorist targets. So I was in what is now the National Clandestine Service, formerly the DO. The Department of Science and Technology trained me in sophisticated eavesdropping device detection, which when I was an agent on William Casey's detail, that one of my jobs was to operate the sophisticated equipment searching for eavesdropping devices all throughout headquarters. So that was my training and part of the Directorate of Science and Technology. The Directorate of Administration, I went through the grueling process, the same as a case officer goes through, and became a staff security officer, which is like an NCIS officer without hours, basically. I mean, it's very difficult. So I got into that, and that's where I did espionage investigations when Robert Hansen was revealed as a full staff security officer. Oh golly, there's so much more. Let's see. We've got the DA, DI, DS&T. I did a lot of work for the National Reconnaissance Office on satellite programs. I worked for the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, and I'm trying to think. There's something I'm missing, but anyway, all the directorates plus the outside agencies like the NRO and NGA, I did tours with. So I've done, goodness, probably 12 different assignments during my time there.
Wow, that's fascinating, and that's a lot of There's a lot of shroud of mystery there, and I think that we're starting to unpack a little bit of it. People, I should say it this way: people are starting to look at unpacking a little bit of it because they're seeing it. I think all the ties back to the State Department. You just mentioned Victoria Nuland, who that's a name that people are starting to hear more and realize. Wait a minute, she's not at the CIA. No, we're talking about a former Assistant Secretary of State, Undersecretary of State. I think with the USAID scandal, that really started to peel back everyone realizing, man, a lot of this stuff comes back to the State Department. So It kind of, it realizes, it starts to hit the worry of, okay, if John Ratcliffe is going to do a solid job here, if we're going to dismantle USAID or something like that, my question is, where's the State Department dismantling? Or is this the place where we actually have some reform and bring some stuff back to, obviously it's the oldest of the, of the cabinet secretaries, the oldest of the agencies. This is a very interesting web that starts to come back to the State Department at each point. You realize the CIA is kind of the intelligence and then the combat action arm almost. And then USAID is the funding and the psychological side. It gets very, very dicey the farther into it you go. Yeah,
that's right. USAID, the CIA using USAID funded 4,000 media outlets that published only anti-conservative left-wing news only under USAID and Samantha Powers. And I think they're starting to investigate USAID. And I think Samantha Powers, I hope, will be brought before Congress for what she did. That was part of the State Department. When I was doing counterintelligence investigations, and I used to go out and brief a lot of other agencies on that thing, the Department of State was riddled with espionage and corruption, just riddled with it. I had people come up to me after some of my counterintelligence briefings and tell me that they had caught their supervisor giving information to the Soviets, and on and on and on and on and on. Their computer security was abysmal. It was a mess. because there's no accountability. There's no polygraph to ensure that people are doing things honestly. And I saw Department of State officials overseas, especially, just abuse taxpayer dollars on worthless things over and over and over and over and over. So yeah, it does need to be reformed. I'm real happy about Marco Rubio being installed as Secretary of State. When I came out finally and sent a evidentiary fax to every member of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence and the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, I faxed them a memo of evidence of the break-ins to our house and everything that had happened, leaving out names and things so it wasn't classified. None of them responded to me. Now, I have programs, I know why now. They need to be reformed themselves. But the only person that responded was Marco Rubio, the only one. And he said, hey, I'm sorry what you went through. I will look into it. So he answered, which means he was not a deep state. He was not under the hold of the deep state. Anyway, so now he's Secretary of State. Oh, God help Marco Rubio, because it is a mess. USAID is a mess. USAID will either go away or be cut back. I think it will be dissolved completely. And that there will go a big arm of the corrupt Department of State and the CIA's global propaganda program. So I'm pretty convinced that it will end and go away. And perhaps another program of assistance will be created that's not connected to the CIA or propaganda. But I think that's what's going to happen. But everybody support and pray for Marco Rubio, because he really has got a tough job. But he's a man for it, I think.
Something you said that I thought was interesting about the connection between the CIA and USAID and all the media outlets. Most people know that the CIA has dabbled in mind control because the MK Ultra program is very famous, and then but people kind of think like, oh well, that's over. There were the congressional hearings. Mind control is done. They don't do that. But if they're like in the media environment, having a say in what kind of news comes across people's TV, like that, that's still happening.
Yeah.
And something I was thinking about earlier today is how a lot of the time, or like growing up learning history, we're taught about like Joseph Goebbels was like the best propagandist of all time. But then you think about it and you think, well, we won the war and propaganda was part of that war. So doesn't that mean that our propaganda is better than Nazi propaganda? Which, I think is true. There's a lot more Americans than there are Nazis out there. So I'm curious what you can tell us about the involvement of the CIA in propaganda and soft mind control, especially through entertainment. If you know anything about if the CIA is involved with Hollywood or the TV production we see or anything like that.
That is an excellent question. I call it Mockingbird 2.0 because the CIA is all over it. CIA has created what's called the Hollywood Liaison Office that barged their way in to look at any scripts about the CIA. For example, the movie Argo, which was a good movie, but Argo is fake. The CIA wrote some of that script, which was false, making it look like it was the CIA that got those hostages out. It wasn't true at all. It was the Canadian embassy, and they're still upset about that. So the CIA actually wrote part of that script in Hollywood, and they routinely meet with Hollywood executives. And if you go out and Google Stephen Colbert's show with the actress, I think the movie is The Agency, kind of pumping up the CIA, and she let it slip right in that interview. And you can watch this. She started kind of going off on how she'd been meeting with spies and that the CIA had taken them out to dinner and the CIA had put them through CIA training programs. And Stephen Colbert, being a Mockingbird himself, freaked out and sat back in his chair and changed the subject immediately. Go watch that. That speaks volumes about the CIA's interaction and propaganda and mind control through video media, without question. The CIA is a propaganda organization. That's part of what it was given in the National Security Directive 10-2 is that they could engage in this kind of propaganda. That one of my steps is to reform that National Security Council directive. But anyway, they've trained journalists in agent tactics. The CIA, what was called the Trusted News Initiative, I don't know if you guys have heard about that, but the CIA approached the Washington Post, the AP, UPI, Google, Facebook, and Twitter and demanded that they sign an agreement with the CIA to censor certain parts of speech or things on their social media that were critical of the CIA or were not part of the CIA's censorship or propaganda machine. Anything censor anything that was contrary to the CIA or the government narrative. They actually signed that agreement, and that's where we saw all the censorship in Facebook and Twitter and the Washington Post, because they literally signed an agreement with the CIA that the CIA they would follow in lockstep with the CIA's propaganda initiative. That is just chilling and mind-blowing, but they did it. Of course, we talked about Bob Woodward. I'd encourage people to get the book. He is a fabricator. Enough said there, but the book goes into him in great detail. A lot of people don't know that when before COVID was rolled out, the CIA was doing studies at Johns Hopkins University on pandemic propaganda and lockdowns, and a process to lock down and disseminate propaganda to the American people in the event of a pandemic. 3 months later, COVID hit, and what we saw with the propaganda lockdowns was a CIA rollout of the program that they had already developed and tested. That's where that came from. The Twitter files, we all know about that, about their interaction in that. Facebook, which has turned a corner, it looks like, because of Trump's strength. Multiple former CIA employees, former quote unquote CIA employees, were hired by Facebook to moderate information. And we could go on and on and on. They're all over the news media, and it's right in our face when you talk about Mockingbird. MSNBC, their chief intelligence analyst is John Brennan, former corrupt director of the CIA. He is giving commentary to people through the news, and then there's James Clapper, who's the senior analyst for CNN, disseminating information through CNN. So talk about Mockingbird 2.0 right in our face. They're all over it. And that's one of the wonderful things that has happened because of programs like yours, social media, and other people that have come out and exposed this. And now more people than ever know that the mainstream media is corrupt. They have a quid pro quo with editors in the Washington Post, the New York Times, and others, that they will publish nothing negative about the CIA. And if they do, the CIA will cut off the spigot of information they're feeding them. And the journalists who report that will lose their careers. So that's the kind of effect the CIA has on our mainstream news media. Thank God for alternative factual programs now, because people now don't trust the media any longer. Thank God, for the first time since 1947, this is happening. So this is remarkable.
Yeah. And so, I mean, in spite of the media stranglehold, Trump beat them the first time in 2016 in a very highly propagandized election. But then what just blew my mind was in 2024, he skipped it altogether and went to podcasts. And what happened? He steamrolled the electoral vote and the popular vote. And I looked and I thought, this is great. I'm celebrating that Trump won, but he went and found the people. And guess what? They're not watching cable news anymore. This right here is probably one of the biggest breakthroughs. Do you know much? Because I saw the announcement that the Trump administration was going to hold former officials accountable, and they were looking to reject the security clearances of the 51 that signed the Hunter Biden laptop memo. Did that get followed through on, John Brennan and a lot of the rest of his ilk? Did they lose their clearances? I needed to follow up with that story, and I never saw it from the back channels. It just went quiet.
They did. Donald Trump revoked all their clearances, including Clapper and Brennan. Mike Morrell, the former deputy director of the CIA, revoked his clearance, and also he blocked them from entrance to any government building, so they couldn't try to sneak in and do it anyway. So he did that, and I told my wife, I think Bobby Kennedy and some of our texts, somebody pinched me. I think I'm dreaming. This is the first time anybody has challenged what I call the shadow government, which is the CIA, has challenged it like this in our history. So it is absolutely fantastic, and there's more to come. John Ratcliffe has been appointed, as you know, as the new director of the CIA. I've done interviews on this. He needs to be very, very careful. The CIA has a long history of going around the DCI Director Center on Intelligence. Pompeo said that. Former DCI James Woolsey said that even though they were the director, the CIA wasn't telling them what they were doing. That's going to happen now. The knives are going to be out for Ratcliffe. They think they can wait him out for 4 years because they're all staff officers. They're going to be there for 25, 30 years, many of them. They think they'll wait him out and withhold information from Ratcliffe. That will happen. They will resist him at every turn because some of the things that they have done are major human rights violations, genocide and other things. So he, even more than Marco Rubio, has got an incredible job on his hands. The only solution, I am convinced, is a complete break apart and restructuring of the CIA. That's the only thing that's going to work. It's a global juggernaut. It's got its tentacles in the media. It's got its tentacles in the Wall Street. It's got its tentacles all around the world in off the books banking and other things. There's no way you're going to be able to reform that monster unless you kill it and break it apart and eliminate the National Clandestine Service and move that into a separate agency outside of the CIA's control. It's the only way.
Well, I mean, you say right there, you've used the phrase a few times during our conversation here, to break it apart, to break it apart. And that of course calls back to one of the other times I think that a lot of us have, back in the 1960s, we have conceptions of, well, were we about to witness a president challenge the power of the CIA, and then suddenly he's off the radar? And that's led to decades and decades of speculation and top secret status and classification. I mean, I'm not asking, I'm not going to ask you to speculate or to tell us what you know if the CIA killed JFK and RFK or anything else, but the documents here, I mean, you speculate away, but here's my question. The JFK and the RFK documents, are we ever going to receive anything that's not redacted that actually tells us the truth? Do they even exist anymore, or have they been shredded?
And the MLK documents,
and the MLK documents, and frankly, the Epstein files as well. My question is, with each of these things, there seems to be so much connection to our own intelligence agencies, to the spider webs that they tangle through other organizations, nonprofits, media entities, and then to foreign intelligence agencies as well, foreign governments, allies, bad actors alike. Right. I have to look at it and say, I don't think these files are ever going to come out. I don't even think the files exist anymore. Anything that will be dumped, is it altered at this point? I mean, they've had decades. Like they're sitting on it, hoping no one gets the truth. I have a feeling they've covered themselves more than this. If they were willing to go to the lengths of presidents and presidential candidates dying, which at least seems to have some sort of complicity, even if it's not exactly directly active. Right. What's your take on all this? Do these exist anymore? Are we ever going to see anything, or is the accountability of the past gone? We just have to break it apart now.
That's of course an excellent question, and one that I think most people are asking. What role did the CIA have in the assassination of John F. Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy, for that matter? And of course, I'm a fact man, and so I've looked at the facts. All we have is pieces of the puzzle. However, remember when MK Ultra came out and the Church Committee, the CIA was torturing people, doing mind control experiments, putting them on LSD without their knowledge, getting Johns with hired prostitutes, and having the prostitutes feed these men with LSD and watch how they acted. Ted Kaczynski went through 200 hours of MK Ultra torture. Well, okay, that came out in the Church Committee. That was the tip of the iceberg. Immediately, the director of the CIA, Richard Helms, destroyed 10,000 MK Ultra documents, which we will never see. Now, if you go back to the JFK assassination, and I think there was some CIA involvement, and I think you can document that with some shreds of evidence. And I'll talk about that in a moment. But you can count on the fact that after John F. Kennedy was murdered, do you think the CIA took those records of who was involved and how they did it and stored them in a file room down in the CIA file office for later? No. Just like MK Ultra, they destroyed everything. Now, an interesting thing is, over in Japan, there was a CIA officer doing an audit of kind of some CIA programs and operations, and he stumbled across receipts where the CIA was paying Lee Harvey Oswald and had him under what's called a 201 ZR rifle file, meaning he was a paid asset of the CIA. Proven, factual, no question about that. Jack Ruby, if you remember Jack Ruby, he wouldn't talk. They put him in jail. He went to trial. Jolly West Lewis, one of the architects of MK Ultra, along with Sidney Gottlieb, demanded to be Jack Ruby's psychiatrist during that time. They let him in. They let Jolly West Lewis in to meet with Ruby. He left and they asked for his assessment, and he said, "Oh, he's mad. He's mentally insane." And after that, Ruby was essentially crazy after West's visit. Facts, all facts. So you take those pieces of the puzzle. We know Jack Ruby was running guns for the CIA. We have evidence of that to Cuba to try to prompt war with Cuba. That was running those guns into Cuba to try to extend the war. So we've got facts like that, and they're like puzzle pieces that kind of lead to a center truth. And I think it's clear to me that the CIA and the mafia were both involved in the murder of John F. Kennedy. Also, Bobby Kennedy Sr., there was CIA involvement in that. Bobby and Kenny and I have talked about that. Sirhan was, we both think, an MK Ultra subject. He did not fire the kill shot. This is just factual. Sirhan did not fire the kill shot on Bobby Kennedy Sr. It was fired from behind, somebody right behind him. Probably the security guard that was behind him did it. Sirhan had no knowledge of even trying to do the assassination. And when psychiatrists went in to talk to him, he was so programmable, they had him climbing his cell like a monkey. And Bobby Kennedy Jr., I know, he doesn't think that Sirhan did it either. I don't either. I think it was a security guard behind Bobby Kennedy. There were bullet holes going the opposite direction in the door frame of that kitchen that the LAPD, who I exposed, is trained by the CIA and counterintelligence. The LAPD tore off those door frames, took them out, and burned them. That is destruction of evidence, a fact. So this is the only way many times that you can corner secrecy is by getting the facts that they missed or little pieces that you can find where you need to go and hold them accountable or at least try to expose it.
Whoa.
Well, that's that kind of to the point. I don't know if there is it sounds like there's never going to be a smoking gun document or set of documents anywhere. No. It's just the pieces of what we know and who is or isn't saying this or that. It just, I mean, it's like looking at your kid and you weren't standing in the room. What happened? Well, never mind. I know I'm never going to get the straight truth, but I know what you're saying isn't true. Like I think that's the situation where we're left, which is basically brings us down to shattering the apparatus that has been built, how that's actually done, if it can be done. I mean, here's my question. You've mentioned John Ratcliffe. I would have said going into the Trump administration, Ratcliffe and Rubio are out of Congress, not necessarily two of my favorites. I've got some disagreements with him as a super conservative on the domestic policy, but sure. My goodness, Marco Rubio has been a fantastic advocate for America First and probably about the best choice Trump could have made. I'm blown away. And that sounds like John Ratcliffe might have some hard times coming, but is a good pick. I mean, it makes me wonder though, where else do some of the others fit in this apparatus? Tulsi Gabbard at DNI, boy, she was someone that
outstanding.
They didn't want to see, and Kash Patel at the FBI. But of course, with all the Epstein documents and Pam Bondi and Kash Patel, it's of course calling into question, because what do people want? They want answers. They want the facts. Right. So what's your estimation on this crew that's been put together? Do you see any potential weak links in the chain of what Trump has built? Or are these folks really just in the fight of their lives and we have to give them some grace because it seems like they're on the hunt for it? What's your take on it?
I don't think there are any weak links, and I think they are in the fight of their lives, and I think all of them are the perfect choice. And Ratcliffe, for example, was the only he was director of national intelligence, I think, for 6 months, 5 years as a congressman. Ratcliffe was the only one that stood up during the Russiagate false information scandal. Ratcliffe stood up as an intelligence official and said, this is not true. Russiagate is a fabrication. It's false, going against John Brennan, who'd leaked it to the media as it was calling it intelligence. So Ratcliffe stood up at his own expense for Trump against the shadow government, the CIA. So that, to me, is a good calling card that he is loyal to these reforms and changes. I don't think he's going to be able to do it unless it's broken apart. But Tulsi Gabbard, you got to love it. Not only is she brilliant, served her country with honor, but she was targeted herself by the shadow government deep state. So she knows what it feels like. That's the kind of person you want in charge, somebody that knows how it feels to be targeted and surveilled. When I came out and went public for the first time, I was traveling. I was doing security for this international speaker. Every airport we went through, they would take me aside and pat me down and check me out. And the other guys would just keep going through that over and over and over when I first came out, to the point where I was joking and saying, I'm going to get just a plastic see-through suit so I can just walk through and get this over. And then after about a year, it stopped. So, I mean, they were clearly on me as they were on Tulsi Gabbard. So you got somebody who's brilliant, loyal, a patriot, and has felt the sting of government corruption.
It's very true.
Yeah.
Now, the Epstein files, if I may mention the Epstein files.
Yeah, please.
Oh, my gosh. Let me just say this. Epstein clearly, I think it's factual, was an intelligence asset. Mossad and the CIA. The CIA doesn't like to let the Mossad do anything of that level without them being involved also. So he was a CIA Mossad intelligence asset. No question about that. All right, so he was an intelligence asset, which means the CIA is involved, which means the shadow government is involved, which means the state secrets privilege is involved, which means the power of secrecy to withhold information on very powerful people is involved. That's what's going on here. They're trying to keep this stuff using the abuse of the power of secrecy, which I talk about at length. They're trying to use the power of secrecy to keep all of this information from coming out, because there are some people in there, I think, at very high levels in government and in corporate America. Will we ever see those records? The fight is on with Cash and Pam Bondi. The fight is on. They just fired the FBI director that withheld a truckload of Epstein files. They now have those. Watch this with a close eye and see if the CIA or the shadow government invokes secrecy to stop the release of some of these files because he was intelligent. Just keep an eye out for that. That's what they do.
Mm-hmm. And in this case, I think that these efforts aren't. Trump has multiple levels to what he's doing. Where it's get the documents out, but also see who's trying to cover themselves as we get the documents out, like that
Right.
that FBI or the director that just got fired because he
Right.
it's like that stuff they put on your teeth or like a black light that shows where a chemical is. It's you shine a light and things look different and you can tell.
Exactly.
Mhm.
What you're doing is you're lighting up the darkness.
Mm-hmm.
Just like you said, the analogy you used, that's right. And this is deep darkness involving powerful people, including members of the Republican and Democratic Congress and Senate. That's where the rub is, right there.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a lot of power to stop things like this. And at least 6 of them, just the tip of the iceberg, 6 of them have major investments in CIA contractors like Lockheed Martin and others. So they're in the pocket. And they've been part of the problem. So getting these files out, it's got to be a national mission, part of the American people. And the Trump team is the one to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Is it really the fixing of this, the actual nuts and bolts mechanics? And this is kind of my, closing, besides making sure we point people back to your book and your work so they can get to it, because there is a lot. Like I said, I didn't want to give away everything. There's a lot in the book they need to go get. But in fixing this, reforming the CIA, all of the branches of the State Department nonsense that's going on, what's happening right now, is it really as simple as someone just needs to walk in and fire everybody? You've got to, Trump needs to show up, or Pam Bondi and Kash Patel show up at the FBI field office in New York and say, you're fired, get out. Find the loyal people who are willing to actually move the boxes into the truck. We're going to take the truck back. Anyone who stands in our way, you're fired. We're going to physically escort you. It seems like there's not really any processes, except maybe, you would hope that Congress would move forward with their, the House with the power of the purse, and they would move forward with some oversight. But the reality is this is an internal fight in the enforcement branch, the executive branch. And this is something, Mace and I have been talking about this since last fall. For a lot of us limited government conservatives who don't want a president to rule by the pen and the phone. Thank you, Obama. We want to rule by the Constitution. We look and say, oh my gosh, they really have suspended the Constitution. So no, I want a powerful executive who will do things righteously to go in and clean up the bad guys. And then we can get back to the Constitution. Is it just, is that really just it? It's going to have to be brute power inside the executive branch fighting itself to try to fire everyone and then prove to the courts and the world that this is what we're allowed to do. I'm the chief executive. I can hire and fire people who I want under my, branch of government. Is there any other way to it that we need to be looking at? Or is that pretty much it?
No, that's just part of it. Ratcliffe has the authority to fire some of these dark figures within the CIA if he can find them. As does the president of the United States. Yes, I have a list of names myself of people that should be fired that engage in a criminal conspiracy, a violation of Title 18, and I've got a whole program on that. They actually have done that. So there are some names out there, like the head of the CIA Inspector General back in 2002. Anyway, those people are ingrained careerists inside the CIA. At first, as I mentioned, you got to find them with evidence. That would take years if they were ever able to do it. The only solution, and I just published 13 reforms to the CIA on X, and the CIA took it down. I had a parody of the CIA logo, with blood dripping out of it and a dragon's head, and used to be able to do that. Well, apparently you can't anymore. You can't touch the CIA logo, but that's another story. But the CIA took all those CIA reforms down, and every other negative post that I had made on X about the CIA, Kevin _Shipp. So I contested it and fought back and forth and put new pictures of the church committee in there. They're all back up again, but I have no access to my X page yet. But those reforms are what has to be done. They're radical, and they're the only way. The first one, I won't go through all 13, but the first one is repeal the National Security Act of 1947 and the National Security Council Directive 10-2 of 1948. Repeal both of those, enact a new, and Congress can do this if they're not in the CIA's pocket, enact a new National Security Act of 2025, which removes covert operational authority from the CIA and puts it in a separate agency or in the DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency. That's the first major step, is gut the monster's power, unbridled power of secrecy over the American people, Congress, and everything else. Gut that. That's the first reform. I've got 13 of them. They're back up on Kevin_Shipp so people can look at it. But that's the only way to do this.
We are renewing the Republic, and it's
Yes.
a messy and absolutely major task ahead of us. I can't believe we're at 40 something days in. I can't believe what they've done in 40 something days. I'm excited about the first 2 and 4 years.
Yeah.
That's all I have to say.
Me too.
Mason, you have anything else?
I got nothing else. This has been fantastic. Thank you so much for gracing us with your presence on our unauthorized caucus. And I have so much to think about now. I'm dumbfounded in many ways.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you, guys. It's been a privilege. And as before the interview, I've been a big fan of Phyllis Schlafly for years, and a courageous patriot and lady. So I'm glad to do this interview and support you guys, because what you're doing is just awesome.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Hey, everybody. We'll point you to it in all the links. Again, this is former CIA officer Kevin Shipp. He's got a new book out, new-ish, last October. Very, very relevant, though. Everything that happens in the news headlines, it becomes more relevant at each turn. Twilight of the Shadow Government, How Transparency Will Kill the Deep State. I'll have that linked. I'll have Kevin's X account linked. We'll make sure you get to all of it, plus some of the resources we talked about today. That'll all be there. If you're on the podcast, make sure to leave a rating and review. Go to unauthorizedcaucus.com and you can subscribe, get the notification and all the links for this one. And we'll make sure we point you over to Kevin's book, of which you need to get a copy, because this is probably one of the most important things to help you understand what we are fighting right now in the headlines. I say what we're watching being fought about in the headlines. So you want to be educated on it. This is the ultimate conversation starter. Kevin, thank you so very much. We appreciate your time and your work, your service, your commitment to the truth.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll be back next week for another Unauthorized Caucus. We'll see you next Monday, everybody.